Hamas. The militant group has been rising in global prominence after springing a massive surprise attack on Israel. How did a group that grew out of a tiny enclave called Gaza orchestrate one of the deadliest terrorist attacks the world has ever seen? And how is it this very group traces its roots to a charitable movement?
Hamas was an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the Muslim Brotherhood, who was initially an organization in Egypt in the 20s, the Muslim Brotherhood were mostly focused on social and cultural activities, charities. It was about humanitarian relief for the population.
While the organization focused on education and charitable work, it also grew to become a major political force.
So the Muslim Brotherhood is a Sunni Islamist phenomenon that is basically promoting a vision of how Muslims, and Sunni Muslims in particular, ought to be united across the Arab world, across the broader world as well, but definitely within the Arab world, and that if Muslim populations are going to create states, those states should be guided by Islamic rule.
Early 1940s, they started branching out into neighboring countries, and the next door to Egypt was Palestine.
But by this time, the Muslim Brotherhood had already grown a reputation in Egypt for political assassinations. They were killing prominent leaders who were trying to outlaw the organization. But in Palestine, the Muslim Brotherhood returned to its roots as a social and religious movement.
Now, the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood, after their creation in Jerusalem, they said, the armed struggle should be delayed. Now it's not the time. This is for us. The overriding priority was focusing on the youth and the Islamization of the society. You cannot fight a huge war against Israel without bringing back your people to the pristine path of Islam and religions. Now, for many Palestinians, this is nonsense. Some Palestinians at the time thought the overriding concern should be the Zionist organizations, that neither the Zionists nor the British would listen to any Palestinians' demands, and the effective way of fighting both was the armed struggle.
This is a sentiment that had taken root during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, when scores of Palestinians were chased out of their homes during the fighting. Amongst these Palestinians were Ahmed Yassin and his family. Then barely 7, Yassin flees with his family from their home in Ashkelon to seek refuge in Gaza, 15 kilometers away. 5 years later, tragedy struck again. Yassin breaks his spine. Some reports say while playing soccer with his friends.
He was totally paralyzed, basically, on a wheelchair.
In his 20s, Yassin leaves Gaza to study at the prestigious Al-Azhar University in Cairo. It is here that he is influenced by Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood. But a year later, a lack of funds and declining health forces him to go home to Gaza. He starts teaching Arabic and Islamic studies. But on the side, he forms the Mujama al-Islamiyah, a charity affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood that provided social and financial aid, particularly to refugees in Gaza. And in the preceding years, he becomes a prominent preacher.
So you have this man who is basically can't move himself, and yet he can move masses. He can move thousands and tens of thousands of people in the mosques and even beyond. He would deliver, all these sermons in mosques in the Gaza Strip. He was powerful, religiously speaking.
But in 1984, the Israelis arrest Yassin after finding an arms cache in a mosque he built. They release him a year later as part of a prisoner exchange deal. 2 years later, in 1987, he forms Hamas, a Palestinian Sunni Islamist political and military organization, which is also the Arabic word for zeal.
If we go back to the initial charter, the document of 1987, Hamas is also an acronym which refers to Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, which in Arabic means the movement of the Islamic resistance. Two elements here, resistance and Islamic. The first one, resistance, because 1987 is the time of the first Intifada. The first Intifada is this popular movement that started in the Palestinian territories against the Israeli occupation.
After the Six-Day War, Israel occupied the rest of Palestinian territories, namely the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which was previously under Jordan, and the Gaza Strip, which was then controlled by Egypt. Israel also gained the Golan Heights from Syria and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. The Sinai Peninsula was eventually returned. But for the rest of the occupied territories, Israel began building settlements, considered illegal by international law, displacing Palestinians in the process.
So Hamas was part of that context. But what was also significant is that it considers Palestine to be an Islamic Arab entity. Palestine, according to Hamas, is everything that existed before the creation of Israel in 1948. It doesn't consider the basic recognition of the Israeli state. They want to liberate the whole territory of Palestine, which means basically the destruction of Israel.
A two-state solution was anathema to them. They wanted to make sure that Israel was not going to exist.
Their charter clearly expresses genocidal intent. Hamas very specifically has those genocidal intent, not as statements by its leaders, but actually in its founding document, which was specifically never overturned, by those people who are presently in the driver's seat.
The same charter also made clear that any land that was historically conquered by Muslims by force belongs to Muslims till Judgment Day. To achieve its aims, Hamas at first targeted the Israeli military, abducting soldiers and killing them. But that soon changed in the 1990s. In 1993, Israel and the Palestinians signed the first Oslo Accord. The Palestinians were represented by Yasser Arafat. He's the chairman of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO, and also leader of its biggest political party then, Fatah. The PLO is a coalition of Palestinian groups that seeks Palestinian statehood. And the agreement that Arafat signed was supposed to set out the process for a possible two-state solution. That is, Israel and Palestine existing as two separate independent countries at peace with one another, with Palestine established in the Gaza Strip and West Bank. Extremists from both sides saw the agreement as a betrayal.
In 1994, an extremist terrorist settler in the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron, he opened fire against Palestinian prayers.
The attack left 29 people dead. The Ibrahimi Mosque is also known as Abraham's Sanctuary, the sacred burial place of the common patriarch to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. The terrorist shooter was an Israeli physician, a supporter of Kash, a terrorist Zionist organization.
And that was a crime that shocked the Palestinian society to the core, because it happened when everybody was talking peace.
Muslims are given 41 days to mourn and pay their respects to the dead. 41 days after the massacre, Hamas retaliated with a wave of suicide attacks, its first against Israeli civilians. It leads the US to declare Hamas a terrorist organization. Other countries follow suit. The wave of suicide attacks, however, did not win Hamas any popular Palestinian support. A 1996 poll by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research questioned over 1,000 respondents. It found over 43% supporting the rival Fatah faction, which fronted the Oslo peace process. Hamas had only 8% support. This was a year after the Palestinian Authority was established as a form of self-rule in accordance to the Oslo Accord. Ten years on, sentiments among Palestinians shifted so much towards Hamas that in the 2006 Palestinian legislative election, Hamas won 44% of the votes, narrowly beating Fatah's 41%. And given that in the parliamentary elections, the winner takes all for district seats, Hamas was able to sweep 74 seats out of 132, while Fatah took only 43.
على الإدارة الأمريكية أن تحترم إرادة الشعب الفلسطيني، أن تحترم إرادة الشعب الفلسطيني وأن تحترم إفراز صندوق الاقتراع، خاصة بأنه كمان حركة حماس مش جاية لوحدها للساحة، هي جاية ومعها كل أبناء وقوى وفصائل الشعب الفلسطيني.
The Palestinians have been extremely frustrated with the Palestinian Authority of Yasser Arafat and the current president Mahmoud Abbas, because the Palestinian Authority is seen as corrupted, is seen as weak and unable to deliver on the peace promises of the 90s.
The school system was falling apart. People weren't getting the social welfare that they felt they needed. It really had very little to do with ideology. It was mainly that people wanted social services. And Hamas at that time was very clean.
They were involved in not just military operations, but they were involved on the ground in providing jobs, providing charities.
They were not corrupt. They were extremists, but they were honest extremists. So they won the election.
Hamas's victory was more a result of the fact that Palestinians were fed up of this nascent peace process. And what Hamas was offering was to jumpstart the political horizon, was to put an end to that corruption and inefficient administration, to put an end to what at that time was a breakdown of law and order in the territories.
But there was one other reason for Hamas's popularity. Barely months before the elections, Israel completed its disengagement from Gaza, unilaterally withdrawing both its security forces and all of its 8,500 settlers.
Well, Israel continued to settle the West Bank. It did decide to vacate Gaza in 2005 because there weren't that many settlers there, and it took a lot of military personnel to protect them. Most Israelis supported the withdrawal. Most of them were fine with it.
At the time, a lot of it had to do with security considerations, particularly in regards to Palestinian attacks to Israeli military and settlers.
So, aside from promising to wipe out corruption, Hamas also claimed credit for Israel's withdrawal from Gaza, a claim which helped Hamas gain further support among the Palestinian electorate. Just 4 months before the elections, the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research questioned over 1,000 Palestinian adults. It found that 84% of Palestinians see Israel's disengagement from Gaza as a victory for armed resistance. With the largest proportion, 40% crediting Hamas for this achievement. But despite winning the elections, Hamas struggles to form the government. Israel refuses to hand over custom duties and taxes it collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority, leaving it short of money. To bolster its rule, Hamas tries to form a unity government with Fatah, but fails.
Israel considers Hamas a threat. Once those elections produced the results that the international community, actually specifically Israel and its Western backers, didn't like, that's when we then saw the Western-backed coup, where they equipped and helped train specific units within Fatah security forces to conduct a preemptive coup against what was at the time a legitimately elected government.
The Palestinians soon descended into civil war, with reports of extraordinary levels of brutality by both the Hamas and Fatah militants, including drive-by shootings, rocket-propelled grenade attacks, as well as members from both sides being thrown off buildings by their rivals. When the dust settles months later, Fatah remains in power in the West Bank and Hamas is firmly in control of Gaza. And by that time, Gaza was devoid of Israeli troops. Since then, Hamas has used Gaza to launch numerous rocket attacks and raids into Israel. This is a propaganda video released by Hamas. This isn't the October 7 terror attack. It's a rehearsal and a replica of the Erez crossing between Israel and Gaza. The same video also showed them going building by building through the reconstruction of an Israeli town. Hamas released this video on September 12 in its Telegram group, nearly a month before the attack. But this was barely reported in Israel, which was then troubled by its own domestic politics. On the same day of the release, news headlines in Israel were dominated by an unrelated court case in the Supreme Court, part of a political saga that has sharply divided Israeli society. The case was a petition against an amendment that will end the Supreme Court's ability to overturn government decisions it deems unreasonable. This amendment is part of a list of pledges that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to carry out when he took office nearly a year ago. Since the start of 2023, there have been massive protests calling for these reforms to be scrapped. And while the protests were raging through the streets of Israel, Hamas was well into preparing for its October 7 attack against Israel.
According to some accounts, this whole incursion had been planned for about 2 years. In a creative combination of relatively low-tech tactics, the security wall or security fence was breached through a combination of bulldozers, motorcycle troops, the creative use of drones, which were essentially used to take out the high-tech surveillance towers, using very simple explosives dropped on the towers themselves. And this demonstrated a lot of prior preparation.
The answer to the question of how Hamas could have done all that preparation undetected for so long became clearer as the Israeli army launched a full-scale land assault into Gaza. The Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, say they have found strong evidence that Hamas is hiding their military installations near, inside, or under civilian buildings.
מצאנו פה עמדה של שיגור של רקטות, כנראה מחולק לשתיים של 5 ו-5. אפשר לראות כאן, כל הרקטות כבר נורו, מכוונים לכיוון צפון, בתוך שטח הארץ. זה החשמל, והחשמל הזה נכנס עד לתוך המבנה הזה, שהוא בעצם מסגד שממנו מפעילים את הרקטות. אנחנו נמצאים בשבט צופים של צפון הרצועה. אפשר לראות פה את השמות, אפשר לראות פה את כל התמונות. סדר של הצופים הנחמדים. ובתוך השבט עצמו אפשר לראות פה.
We see here a fighting tunnel of Hamas, not more than 15 meters outside of the school. This is a school that was donated about 10 years ago by a German organization.
This is a 3D model rendered by the IDF. IDF claims it shows a multi-level tunnel network that served as an underground base for Hamas in Gaza's Issa area. This video was filmed using a camera strapped to a dog from a K9 unit. The tunnels were supplied with electricity, installed with blast doors, presumably built to be explosion-proof, and special spaces to hide from infiltrators. IDF intelligence also claims they uncovered Hamas footage showing how these tunnels were built. It raises the question, how did Hamas find the funds and tunneling equipment needed to build such an extensive network? Earlier seizures by the IDF off the coast of Gaza seem to provide some clues. These are smuggled weapons and equipment seized by Israeli forces between 2011 and 2014. They include sophisticated missile launching systems, small arms, and building materials, all presumably from Iran. The US State Department says Iran gives up to $100 million annually in combined support to Palestinian terrorist groups, including Hamas.
Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza Strip, in 2017, he clearly said that Iran was the major financial backer of Hamas. Qasem Soleimani was known to have cultivated a very personal level relationship with those militia leaders, and that includes Hamas. And whenever they needed money, they just turned to him, and they would receive suitcases full of cash. So in that case, it was $22 million.
But Iran isn't Hamas's only source of funding. Now that Israel had withdrawn from Gaza, Hamas was now the de facto government. This means that Hamas collects tens of millions of dollars a month in taxes within the territory, including taxes on trade.
When Hamas took over Gaza, one of the things that Israel did is at that point it just cut off. It said, we're not going to let anything in or out of Gaza. So Hamas developed a network of tunnels into Egypt in the area of Rafah, in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. And it was through these tunnels that Hamas was bringing in military equipment, very definitely. But in addition to that, it was bringing in all of the all sorts of goods that could not be made, that could not be found for the Gazan economy. What do most governments do with trade? You tax goods as they're being bought and sold. That's how governments provide for their income. And Hamas realized that it needed to tax the tunnel trade.
And there's more. 11 days after the attacks, the US Treasury started to target what it calls members managing assets in a secret Hamas investment portfolio, as well as a Gaza-based virtual currency exchange, hinting at Hamas's foray into investments and cryptocurrency.
Hamas was, back in 2019, one of the first terrorist organizations to actually do public fundraising. So on the Al-Qassam Brigade's website, which is the militant wing of Hamas, they had options in order, donate via cryptocurrency. They started very simply in having a QR code and a cryptocurrency address to send funds to, and that quickly got shut down because of the fact that it's so publicly out there. the individuals who were donating to them were ultimately prosecuted. So they attempted to get a little bit more creative, which was create an auto-generated one-time use address. Similarly, though, however, because the funds that did get paid in are still on the blockchain and identifiable, that campaign was also shut down. So actually, as of recently of April of now last year, Al-Qassam Brigades announced on their website that they'd no longer be doing cryptocurrency donation campaigns, specifically because of the fact that they didn't want to risk the prosecution to their donors.
Hamas has been accused of channeling the funds it generates, mostly to its military wing, while largely leaving legitimate aid donors like Qatar to pay for basic services. Services that Hamas needs to provide as the de facto government in Gaza. So these multiple sources of funding have enabled Hamas to build itself up beyond just being a militant group.
Hamas is a well-integrated movement that emerged over many decades within the society. And they are doctors, teachers, lawyers, students. It's my cousin and my neighbor, So this is a political, social, religious, sport organization. So you cannot simply say, well, I want to destroy Hamas. I want to remove Hamas from the Palestinian society. It is not something, an external added appendix to the society whereby you can just remove it by a surgical operation or a military operation as we are seeing nowadays in Gaza.
Regardless, Israel has vowed it will not rest until it destroys Hamas completely.
אנחנו מטילים מצור מוחלט על העיר עזה. אין חשמל, אין מזון, אין מים, אין דלק. הכל סגור. אנחנו נלחמים בחיות אדם ואנחנו נוהגים בהתאם.
With the Hamas militants hiding in their midst, holding up in tunnels under their feet, it is the ordinary Palestinians in Gaza who will continue to pay the price for that Israeli pursuit.